She was scrubbing floors when she heard them planning to kill the vampire king in Russian. The three nobles thought no one understood. What they didn't realize, the girl on her knees with the brush was the only person in the entire palace who spoke their language, and the king she'd save would refuse to let her leave his side ever again. The stone floor was cold enough to bite through Mira's threadbare skirt. Her knees ached from hours of scrubbing, her hands raw and reddened from lye soap. But she kept her head down, her brush moving in steady circles, because that's what servants did. They became invisible. They survived by being forgotten. The palace hallways stretched endlessly, all marble columns and vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound. Torches flickered in their iron brackets, casting dancing shadows that never quite reached the corners. 3 months working here, and Mira still wasn't used to the weight of vampire eyes, the way they looked through you like you were made of glass. She'd come from the northern territories, from a village so small it didn't have a name on any map. Her father had been a merchant, trading furs and amber across the eastern borders, teaching her Russian and Polish and Hungarian so she could help with ledgers and translations. Then the fever came. Then the debt collectors. Then the choice between starvation and service. The palace had seemed like salvation. It was just another kind of cage. 3 nobles rounded the corner, their boots clicking against marble. Mira kept scrubbing, her eyes on the floor. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist unless they need you to. The men were deep in conversation, their voices low but not quite whispered. They spoke in Russian, the words flowing fast and fluid, full of hard consonants and rolling vowels. Mira's brush stuttered, just for a moment, just long enough for her heart to skip. Because in 3 months of working in King Theron's palace, she'd never once heard anyone speak Russian. Not the nobles with their refined accents, not the guards with their rough barracks slang, not even the other servants who came from a dozen different territories. Only her. Only Mira. The 3 men passed within feet of her, so close she could smell the wine on their breath, the expensive oils in their hair. They didn't glance down. Why would they? She was furniture. She was stone. She was nothing. But she understood every single word they said. And what they were saying made her blood turn to ice. Lord Vasily spoke first, his voice smooth as silk over steel. Tomorrow night during the treaty signing. The Moravian delegation will provide the distraction. King Theron's attention will be entirely on the visiting dignitaries. Lord Constantine laughed, cold and sharp. The poison is already in place. In the ceremonial wine, he'll toast to peace and be dead before the second course. And the third man, Lord Dmitri, younger than the others but no less dangerous. My contacts in the guard have been paid. When the king falls, they'll secure the throne room. Prince Stefan is already prepared to take the crown, the rightful crown according to the old bloodlines. Mira's hand clenched around the scrub brush so hard her knuckles went white. Prince Stefan, the king's cousin, the one who smiled too much and spoke too little, who'd been passed over for the throne 15 years ago when Theron's father died. The noble's footsteps faded down the hallway, their Russian conversation continuing but growing too distant to hear. Mira stayed frozen on her knees, her mind racing. King Theron was going to be assassinated. Tomorrow night. And no one knew, no one but her. She should tell someone. A guard. The steward. Anyone, but who would believe a kitchen maid? A nobody from the Northern Territories with no family and no connections. She'd be accused of spreading panic at best. At worst, they'd think she was part of the plot, that she'd invented the story for attention or coin. And even if they believed her, how would she explain that she understood Russian? That skill marked her as educated, unusual, possibly dangerous. Servants weren't supposed to speak foreign languages. They weren't supposed to understand the private conversations of nobles. They certainly weren't supposed to overhear assassination plots. But she couldn't do nothing. King Theron might have been distant and cold, a figure carved from marble who ruled from his throne like a statue given life. But he wasn't cruel. He paid his servants. He kept the peace. He'd never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. And the men planning to kill him, the men who spoke in Russian because they thought no one could understand, they were serpents in velvet robes. Whatever came after Theron would be worse. Mira stood slowly, her legs trembling. The bucket of dirty water sloshed at her feet. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, torches guttering in their brackets. She had perhaps 18 hours to decide what to do. 18 hours to find the courage to speak. 18 hours before a king died, and a kingdom burned. And she was just a girl, with a scrub brush, and a dangerous secret. The castle bells tolled evening, the sound echoing through stone corridors like a countdown. Mira spent the night in the servants' quarters, lying awake on her narrow cot while the other girls snored around her. The room smelled of sweat and cheap soap, and too many bodies pressed too close together. Moonlight filtered through the single window, painting silver stripes across the rough wooden floor. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying the conversation. The poison is already in place. Tomorrow night. The treaty signing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw King Theron raising a goblet to his lips, saw him collapse, saw the chaos that would follow. Civil war. Stefan seizing the throne. The careful peace Theron had built crumbling into blood and ash. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She would tell him. Somehow, even if it meant her own death. The palace woke slowly, servants shuffling to their posts in the gray pre-dawn light. Mira dressed in her cleanest apron, tied her dark hair back with shaking hands, and tried to look like she belonged anywhere near the king's private chambers. She didn't. Kitchen maids stayed in the kitchens. They scrubbed pots and peeled vegetables and kept their eyes down. They certainly didn't march through the upper corridors demanding an audience with the Vampire King. The main hallway leading to the royal wing was guarded by 2 soldiers in black armor, their faces hidden behind visors that caught the torchlight like beetle shells. Mira's footsteps faltered. She couldn't just walk up to them. She needed a reason. A legitimate reason. I have information about a threat to the king's life wasn't something that worked in stories, let alone reality. She turned down a side corridor, her mind racing. There had to be another way. A servant's entrance. A back staircase. Something. That's when she saw him. King Theron stood alone in one of the smaller antechambers, a room lined with maps and military texts. He had his back to the door, studying a large map of the kingdom that covered most of one wall. Even from behind, he was imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and hands that looked like they could crush stone. He wore simple black clothing, no crown, no ceremonial armor, just a man looking at a map. But there was something about the way he held himself, the absolute stillness of his posture, that marked him as other, as dangerous, as king. Mira's courage nearly failed her. But the memory of those Russian words pushed her forward. She knocked, soft and hesitant, on the doorframe. King Theron didn't turn. "If you're here to deliver breakfast, leave it on the table." His voice was deep, rough around the edges, like he didn't use it often. "Not breakfast, Your Majesty." Mira's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "Information." Now he turned. Slowly, deliberately, the way a predator turns when it senses prey. His eyes found her across the room. They were pale gray, almost silver, cold as winter storms. His face was angular, all sharp lines and hard edges, with a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her servant's dress, her rough hands, her nervous stance. She waited for him to dismiss her, to call for guards, to demand she leave. Instead, he said. "I don't know you. Mira Volkov, Your Majesty. I work in the kitchens." His expression didn't change. "Then why are you in my private study instead of peeling potatoes?" "Because I overheard something last night. Something you need to know." Theron's eyes narrowed slightly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Servants overhear many things. Most of it is gossip. Not this. Mira forced herself to meet his gaze, even though every instinct screamed to look away. "This is about your life." His stillness became absolute. The kind of stillness that came before violence. "Speak quickly. Your life may depend on the next words out of your mouth." "3 nobles," Mira said, her words tumbling out fast. "Lord Vasily, Lord Konstantin, and Lord Dmitri. They were speaking in Russian in the East Corridor last night. They thought no one could understand. They're planning to poison you tomorrow night during the treaty signing. The ceremonial wine. They have guards bribed. Prince Stefan is involved." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Theron's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes. Something sharp and lethal. "You speak Russian. It wasn't a question. My father was a merchant. He taught me for the trade routes. And you understood everything they said. Every word." Theron crossed the room in 3 long strides. Suddenly he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could see the faint scars on his jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. "Tell me exactly what they said. Every detail. Word for word if you can." So she did. Mira recounted the entire conversation, switching into Russian when she quoted them directly, translating back into common tongue as she went. She described their voices, their positions in the hallway, the confidence in their tone, the way they laughed about his death like it was already accomplished. Theron listened without interrupting. His face remained a mask, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When she finished, silence stretched between them. "He could kill you for this," Theron said finally. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "If they discover you overheard, if they realize you speak Russian, they'll eliminate you before you can warn anyone else." "I know." "Then why tell me? Why not run?" "Because," Mira swallowed hard, "because you're not a bad king, and whoever comes after you will be worse." Something flickered across Theron's face. Too quick to name, but almost like surprise. As if kindness from a servant was the last thing he'd expected, he stepped back, putting distance between them, and turned toward the window. The morning sun was rising over the palace gardens, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "You believe I'm worth saving?" It wasn't quite a question. "I believe chaos and civil war aren't worth the alternative." Mira kept her voice steady. "And I believe those men are vipers." Theron was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gardens. Then he said, without turning, "Do you know why I don't have tasters? Because poison doesn't work on me. I'm immune to nearly every toxin known to exist. It's a gift of my bloodline, so their plot would fail regardless." Mira blinked. "Then why? Why do you care what they're planning if it can't hurt you?" "Because it's not about the poison." Theron turned back to face her. "It's about the conspiracy. The fact that my own nobles, members of my court, are actively plotting my death. That guards can be bribed. That my cousin believes he has a claim to my throne. The poison is just a symptom. The disease runs much deeper." He crossed his arms, studying her with those winter storm eyes. "You could have kept silent. You could have let them try and fail, then watched me execute them for treason. It would have been safer for you. I didn't think of that." The corner of Theron's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "No, I don't suppose you did." He moved to his desk, pulled out a sheet of parchment and began writing in quick, decisive strokes. "I'm going to need you to repeat your story. To my spy master, my captain of the guard and my counsel. They'll need to hear it directly from you. They'll verify your account, investigate the claims, and root out everyone involved in this conspiracy." Mira's stomach clenched. "Your Majesty, if they know I speak Russian, if they know I can understand, I can't go back to the kitchens. I'll be a target." "No," Theron said calmly, still writing. "You won't go back to the kitchens. From this moment forward, you're under my personal protection. You'll be assigned chambers in the royal wing, guards outside your door, and you'll attend me directly as a translator and advisor. If anyone asks, you're being elevated for your linguistic skills," which is true. He finished writing, sealed the parchment with his signet ring, and handed it to her. "Take this to Commander Ravis. He's captain of my personal guard. He'll know what to do." And Mira, his voice stopped her at the door. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Thank you for your courage. Most people would have chosen safety. You chose honor. That's rare." The next hours passed in a blur. Commander Ravis, a grizzled vampire with scars across his face and eyes like flint, interrogated Mira with the precision of a man who'd broken enemy spies for centuries. She repeated the conversation 3 times, in Russian and in common tongue, while scribes took notes and guards stood watch. The spy master, a thin woman named Lyra with silver hair and 2 knowing eyes, asked about accents, about nuances, about whether Mira could identify the voices if she heard them again. "Yes," Mira said. "I could." By midday, the investigation was underway. Guards loyal to Theron had quietly detained the 3 conspirators, along with a dozen others whose names came up during interrogations. Prince Stefan was placed under house arrest in his chambers, his protests ignored. The treaty signing was postponed indefinitely, and Mira was moved to a suite of rooms 3 doors down from the king's own chambers. The suite was larger than her entire village home had been. Silk curtains, soft carpets, a bed with real feathers instead of straw, a fireplace that actually worked, windows that looked out over the gardens instead of a brick wall. 2 guards stood outside her door. Not to keep her in, Commander Ravis had explained. To keep threats out. She was sitting by the window, still overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her circumstances, when someone knocked. "Come in," she called, expecting a servant. King Theron entered instead. Mira scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over the chair. "Your Majesty, I didn't expect you to. Sit down." Theron waved a hand. "We need to talk." She sat. He remained standing, pacing slowly across the room like a caged wolf. "The interrogations have confirmed your account. Lord Vasily and his co-conspirators have confessed to everything. The poison, the bribed guards, Stefan's involvement. They'll be executed for treason within the week." Mira nodded slowly. "Good. But there's a problem." Theron stopped pacing, turned to face her. The conspiracy ran deeper than 3 nobles and a bitter prince. "We've uncovered evidence of foreign involvement. The Moravian delegation you mentioned, they were part of a larger plot to destabilize the kingdom. There are more conspirators, both inside and outside the palace. And we don't know who all of them are yet. Which means you're still in danger." Theron's expression was grim. "You're the witness who exposed the plot, the person who speaks Russian. If there are others involved, they'll want you silenced before you can identify them too. So what do we do?" "We," Theron repeated, and something in his tone made Mira's heart skip. "Yes, we. Because like it or not, you're now essential to uncovering the full scope of this conspiracy. I need your ears, your language skills, your ability to understand conversations that others think are private. I need you at my side during meetings, during negotiations, during court functions. Posing as what? My translator. My advisor. Someone trusted enough to be present for sensitive discussions." He paused. "It will be dangerous. If the remaining conspirators realize what you're doing, they'll try to kill you. And I can't promise I'll always be able to protect you." Mira was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she said, "You're asking me to be a spy. I'm asking you to help me save my kingdom. There's a difference." "Not much of one." Theron almost smiled at that. "No. Not much." She met his eyes across the room, those winter storm eyes that had seemed so cold this morning but now looked almost warm, almost human. "If I agree, will you teach me how to navigate court politics? How to protect myself? How to be something more than just a kitchen maid with a useful skill?" "Yes." "Will you keep your word about the protection? The guards, the chambers, the safety? Until the last conspirator is caught, or I'm dead. Whichever comes first, then I'll do it." Theron studied her for a long moment. "You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both." This time he did smile. Just a little. Just enough to soften the hard edges of his face. "Good. We start tomorrow." The next morning, Mira learned that being the king's translator meant attending a council meeting at dawn. She'd been given new clothes overnight. Proper dresses in deep burgundy and forest green, made of wool instead of rough cotton. Still simple, nothing like the silks and velvets the noble ladies wore, but infinitely better than her servants' rags. A maid had helped her dress, braided her dark hair into something resembling elegance, and escorted her to the council chamber. King Theron sat at the head of a long table carved from black oak. Around him were a dozen of his most trusted advisors, military commanders and court officials. They all turned to stare when Mira entered. "This is Mira Volkov," Theron said without preamble. "She's my new translator and linguistic advisor. She'll be attending all meetings where foreign languages might be relevant. Some of you already know why. The rest will understand soon enough. Anyone who has a problem with her presence can leave now." Silence. No one moved. "Good. Commander Ravas, your report." The meeting proceeded with military efficiency. Reports on the interrogations, lists of names connected to the conspiracy, evidence of foreign gold funding the plot. Mira sat in a chair against the wall, trying to look competent and invisible at the same time. But halfway through the meeting, a delegation was announced. 3 Moravian diplomats requesting an audience. The same delegation that had been part of the original conspiracy, though most of the council didn't know that yet. Theron glanced at Mira. She nodded once. Understood. The diplomats entered. All smooth smiles and elegant bows. They wore rich clothing, expensive furs, and spoke in accented common tongue about trade agreements and renewed alliances. They expressed shock and concern about the postponed treaty signing, asked if there had been some misunderstanding, offered to help resolve any diplomatic tensions. King Theron received them with cold courtesy, asking questions about their journey, their accommodations, their impressions of the kingdom. Standard diplomatic pleasantries. But then 2 of the diplomats turned to each other and spoke quietly in Russian. Just a brief exchange. Barely 10 seconds. Most people in the room wouldn't have noticed or cared. Mira's blood went cold. She kept her face carefully neutral, her hands folded in her lap. But her heart was racing. Because she'd understood every word. When the diplomats left, promises of future cooperation and mutual benefit trailing behind them, Theron dismissed the council. Everyone except Mira. The chamber empty. Guards closed the doors. Theron turned to her. "Well?" Mira stood, crossed to the table and said quietly, "They know about the arrests." One of them asked the other if the package had been delivered. The other said not yet, but soon. Then they agreed to proceed with the eastern route as planned. Theron's expression darkened. The eastern route. Which means they have another plan. Whatever they were supposed to do during the treaty signing, they have a backup. Something involving the eastern territories. He swore softly in a language Mira didn't recognize, then looked at her. "You're certain that's what they said?" "Word for word? I'm certain." Then we have less time than I thought. Theron moved to a map on the wall, studying the eastern borders. If they're planning something along the eastern route, it could be anything. Another assassination attempt. A military incursion. Sabotage of the trade roads. He turned back to her. I need you to do something dangerous. Name it. There's a state dinner tonight. Diplomats from 6 different kingdoms, including the Moravians. I need you there. Listening. Watching. If anyone speaks in Russian, Polish, Hungarian, any language they think is private, I need to know what they're saying. You'll be posing as my personal attendant. No one will think twice about a servant standing near the king. But if they're speaking in those languages, they're probably discussing things they don't want overheard. Mira nodded slowly. If they realize I understand, I'm dead. Yes. If it's too dangerous, I'll find another way. No. She straightened her shoulders. I'll do it. But I need to know something first. What? Why do you trust me? Theron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because you had nothing to gain and everything to lose by telling me about the conspiracy. Because you chose honor over safety, and because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to be invisible and chooses to be seen anyway. That takes strength. Something in his words made Mira's chest tighten. She'd spent her entire life being invisible, being forgotten, being nothing, and now the Vampire King saw her. Really saw her. Be careful tonight, Theron said quietly. I've already lost too many people I trusted. I'd rather not add you to that list. The state dinner was held in the grand ballroom, a cavernous space with crystal chandeliers and floors polished to mirror brightness. Long tables were laden with enough food to feed Mira's entire village for a month. Roasted meats, glazed vegetables, fruits from distant kingdoms, wine in goblets that caught the light like liquid rubies. Mira stood behind King Theron's chair, her hands folded, her expression neutral. Playing the part of a servant so well that nobles looked through her like she was furniture. It was a role she knew intimately. The dinner proceeded with formal toasts and diplomatic pleasantries, but Mira's ears were sharp, her attention divided between a dozen different conversations happening simultaneously. 2 Moravian diplomats at the far end of the table spoke in Russian. Brief exchanges about weather and wine. Nothing suspicious. Then an hour into the dinner, a Polish contingent arrived late. They apologized profusely, blamed delays at the border, and took their seats near the center of the table. One of them, a woman with silver hair and 2 sharp eyes, leaned toward her companion and whispered in Polish. Tomorrow night. The East Gate. 3 wagons of supplies. He nodded. Make sure the guards are paid. Double what we promised. We can't afford mistakes. Mira's fingers tightened behind her back. She waited until the course was cleared, until servants were moving through the room with dessert, then leaned down and whispered to Theron. East Gate. Tomorrow night. 3 wagons. Bribed guards. Polish delegation. He didn't react visibly, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her words, but his hand moved slightly, a gesture so small only she would notice. Understood. After the dinner ended, after the last diplomat had retired and the ballroom had emptied, Theron summoned Commander Ravas and his spy master to his private study. Mira was there too, recounting exactly what she'd heard. The Polish woman's whisper, the specific words, the timing. Ravas stroked his scarred jaw. The East Gate is the least fortified. It's used primarily for supply wagons and merchant caravans. If they're planning to smuggle something in, or someone out, that's where they'd do it. What's in the wagons? Theron asked. I don't know, Mira admitted. They didn't specify. Could be weapons, Lyra the spy master suggested. Could be gold to fund more conspirators. Could be assassins. Or, Ravas said grimly, could be something worse. We need to intercept those wagons, Theron decided. But quietly. If we arrest everyone involved, the remaining conspirators will scatter. We'll never find them all. So we watch. We let the wagons come through. We see where they go and who they meet. We map the entire network before we strike. Risky, Lyra observed. If it's weapons or assassins, we're allowing threats into the palace. Calculated risk, Theron corrected. And we'll have every available soldier watching. Nothing gets through that we don't know about. He turned to Mira. You did well tonight. Thank you, she nodded, suddenly exhausted. It had been 2 days since she'd scrubbed floors in the East Corridor. 2 days since she'd been invisible and forgotten. Now she was standing in the king's private study, helping plan counterintelligence operations against foreign conspirators. The transformation was dizzying. You should rest, Theron said, noticing her fatigue. Tomorrow will be long. Your Majesty, before I go, may I ask something? Ask. Why didn't the poison work? You said you're immune, but how? Theron exchanged glances with Ravas and Lyra. Then he said, because I've been poisoned so many times that my body adapted. When I took the throne 15 years ago, there were 17 assassination attempts in the first 6 months. Poison in my wine, poison in my food, poison on the handles of doors. I survived through sheer stubbornness and luck. Eventually, my bloodline's resistance became absolute. Now nothing works. 17 attempts. Mira repeated softly, in 6 months. And people wonder why I'm cold. Theron's smile was bitter. When everyone around you is trying to kill you, warmth becomes a luxury you can't afford. But you trusted me. I had no reason to. Theron held her gaze. You're right. I didn't. But sometimes you have to choose to trust someone, even when it's dangerous, because the alternative is dying alone. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Then Lyra cleared her throat delicately, breaking the moment. Your Majesty, about tomorrow's operation. Yes. Theron turned back to his advisors, his expression hardening into the mask of a king. Mira took that as her dismissal and quietly left. The next night, Mira stood in the shadows near the east gate, dressed in dark clothing that let her blend into the darkness. Theron stood beside her, similarly dressed, his crown replaced with a simple black hood. Around them, hidden in doorways and on rooftops, were 24 of the king's most trusted soldiers. The wagons arrived exactly when the Polish woman had specified. 3 large carriages pulled by draft horses, driven by men in nondescript clothing. They were stopped at the gate by guards who'd been secretly replaced by Theron's soldiers hours earlier. Papers were checked. Bribes were offered and accepted. The wagons were waved through. Commander Ravas, watching from a nearby rooftop, made a hand signal. Soldiers began following the wagons at a distance, marking their path through the city. Mira watched as the carriages wound through narrow streets, heading not toward the palace but toward the merchant quarter. They stopped outside a warehouse. 3 men emerged from the building, met the drivers, and began unloading crates. Heavy wooden crates that took 2 men to lift. What's in them? Mira whispered. Theron's expression was grim. Nothing good. The crates were carried inside the warehouse. The wagons departed. The men remained inside. Lyra appeared beside them like smoke, silent and sudden. We have the warehouse surrounded. Say the word, and we take them. Not yet, Theron decided. I want to know what's in those crates first. Can we get someone inside? Already done. One of my best agents is posing as a dock worker. He'll report back within the hour. They waited in tense silence. The city around them was quiet, most citizens asleep. Only the desperate and the dangerous moved through streets at this hour. After what felt like an eternity, Lyra's agent returned. His face was pale. Your Majesty, you need to see this. They entered the warehouse through a side entrance. moving silently through shadows. Inside, the crates had been pried open. Mira stared at the contents and felt her blood turn to ice. Weapons. Dozens of them. Crossbows modified to fire silver bolts. Swords with edges designed to cut through vampire flesh. Vials of liquid that reeked of garlic and wolfsbane. And maps. Detailed maps of the palace, with guard rotations marked, weak points circled, and the king's chambers highlighted in red. "This isn't just an assassination plot," Ravis said quietly. "This is preparation for a coup. They're arming an entire force." Theron's face was carved from stone. "How many conspirators are we looking at?" The agent swallowed hard. "Based on the quantity of weapons, Your Majesty, at least 200. Maybe more. 200 traitors, hidden among the palace staff, the noble families, the guard itself, all waiting for the signal to strike." The scope of it was staggering. Mira felt sick. This could destroy the entire kingdom. "It will," Theron said coldly, "if we don't stop it. Lyra, I want every person who touched these wagons identified and tracked. Ravis, triple the guard around the royal wing, and send messages to our allies. If this coup succeeds, the chaos will spread beyond our borders." Both advisors nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Theron turned to Mira. "You should go back to the palace. This is about to become very dangerous. I'm not leaving." She surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "I helped uncover this. I'm seeing it through." He studied her face in the dim warehouse light. "You're a translator, not a soldier." "I'm a survivor," Mira corrected, "and I know when walking away is more dangerous than staying." For a long moment, Theron didn't respond. Then he said quietly, "You're braver than most of my soldiers." I don't know if that's a compliment or a warning. Both. Over the next week, Theron's network of spies worked tirelessly to identify every conspirator. Names were gathered through interrogations, through surveillance, through careful observation of who visited the warehouse and who received messages from the Polish delegation. The list grew longer each day. Nobles who smiled in court while plotting treason, guards who swore loyalty while sharpening silver blades, servants who poured wine while mixing poison. Mira's role became crucial, because many of the conspirators communicated in foreign languages, thinking themselves safe from eavesdropping. But at every state dinner, every diplomatic meeting, every supposedly private conversation in palace corridors, Mira was there. Invisible and overlooked. Understanding everything. She heard Polish nobles discussing payment schedules, Russian merchants confirming weapon deliveries, Hungarian diplomats coordinating with Stefan's supporters. Each piece of information was passed to Theron, who assembled the conspiracy like a puzzle, watching the full picture emerge. "They're planning to strike during the spring festival," Lyra reported during a midnight meeting in the king's study, "when the palace is full of visitors and security is stretched thin. 3 days from now. Can we stop them?" Theron asked. "We can," Ravis said. "But it will require precision. If we move too early, the remaining conspirators will scatter. Too late, and they'll strike first. So we let them think they're succeeding," Theron said slowly. "We allow the festival to proceed. We wait for them to reveal themselves. Then we take them all at once. It's dangerous," Lyra warned. "If anything goes wrong, you could die." "I've been dying for 15 years, Theron said dryly. "I'm quite good at surviving it." His eyes found Mira across the room. "But I want you out of the palace that day. Somewhere safe." "Absolutely not," Mira said immediately. "You need ears at the festival. You need someone who can understand what they're saying in real time. I need you alive. And I need to finish what I started." She met his gaze without flinching. "You told me I was brave or foolish. Probably both. Don't make me prove you wrong by treating me like glass now." Something shifted in Theron's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're extraordinarily stubborn. I learned from the best. Your Majesty." This time he did smile. "Fine. But you stay by my side the entire time. And if anything goes wrong, you run. Agreed? Agreed. The spring festival dawned bright and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that made conspiracies seem impossible. The palace grounds were transformed into a celebration, with musicians and dancers, vendors selling flowers and sweets, nobles in their finest clothing mingling with common citizens, granted special access for the occasion. Mira wore a dress of deep blue, finer than anything she'd owned before, but still simple enough not to draw attention. She stayed close to Theron as he moved through the crowds, greeting visitors, accepting well wishes, playing the role of a benevolent king. But his guards were everywhere, disguised as servants, as musicians, as festival attendees, all of them watching, all of them waiting. Mira's ears caught fragments of conversation as they walked, a Polish noble speaking to a merchant in his native tongue. The weapons are distributed. Everyone knows their positions. A Russian woman whispering to her companion. When the bells toll noon, we move. An Hungarian diplomat laughing with Stefan's supporters. The king won't see it coming. He thinks he's safe. Each piece of intelligence was noted, passed silently to nearby guards who melted into the crowd. The net was closing. Noon approached. The festival crowd grew denser, pressing in from all sides. Theron led Mira to a raised platform where he was meant to give a speech, a tradition that marked the official start of the celebrations. The perfect moment for an attack. The perfect moment for a king to fall. As Theron stepped up to address the crowd, Mira saw them. Conspirators moving through the crowd like shadows, hands reaching for concealed weapons, eyes locked on the platform. On the king, the bells began to toll. 1, 2, 3. Now. Someone shouted in Russian. Chaos erupted. Silver blades flashed in the sunlight. Crossbows rose from the crowd. And Theron's hidden guards moved like lightning. They'd been waiting for this exact moment. The conspirators found themselves surrounded before they could strike. Weapons knocked from hands. Bodies slammed to the ground. More guards poured in from every entrance, blocking exits, securing the platform. The crowd screamed and scattered. Parents grabbed children. Nobles fled. But Theron's soldiers had planned for this, creating safe corridors for innocent civilians while containing the conspirators. Mira stayed frozen on the platform as the battle raged below. It was over in minutes. The conspirators, expecting surprise and chaos, found only organized resistance. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and unprepared for a king who'd known their every move. When the dust settled, over 200 conspirators were in chains, including 3 Moravian diplomats, 2 Polish nobles, and a dozen members of the royal guard. And Prince Stefan, who'd been found in his chambers with a crown already prepared, waiting for news of his cousin's death. Theron stood at the edge of the platform, surveying the captured traitors with cold satisfaction. Then he turned to the terrified festival crowd that remained. "You've witnessed an attempted coup," he said, his voice carrying across the grounds. 200 traitors who sought to murder your king and plunge this kingdom into chaos. But they failed. Not because of military might or political cunning. They failed because one person, someone they would have dismissed as insignificant, chose courage over silence. He extended his hand to Mira. She hesitated, then stepped forward. The crowd stared up at her. This woman uncovered the conspiracy. This translator who spoke languages the conspirators thought were secret. She risked her life to save mine, and to protect this kingdom. Without her, I would be dead. You would be living under a tyrant's rule. And the peace we've built would be ashes. The crowd's fear began shifting to curiosity. Who was she? Where had she come from? How had a translator stopped a coup? Mira Volkov, Theron continued, is hereby granted the title of Royal Advisor and Chief of Linguistic Intelligence. She will sit on my council. She will have lands and wealth and honor, and anyone who threatens her will answer to me personally." The crowd erupted in confused cheering. Mira felt dizzy. A week ago she'd been scrubbing floors. Now she was a royal advisor. Later, after the conspirators had been taken to the dungeons and the festival grounds had been cleared, Theron found Mira in his private study. She was sitting by the window, staring out at the gardens. "You gave me a title," she said without turning. "I gave you what you earned. That's not how nobility works." "No, but it's how justice works." He sat down across from her. "Are you angry? Overwhelmed?" Mira looked at him finally. "I was nobody. I was a kitchen maid who spoke Russian. And now, I'm a royal advisor." "Now you're the woman who saved a kingdom," Theron corrected. "There's a difference." The aftermath of the coup attempt consumed the following weeks. Trials were held publicly, with evidence presented before the entire court. The 200 conspirators were given opportunities to defend themselves, though few could deny their guilt when confronted with testimony, confiscated weapons, and intercepted communications. Prince Stefan's trial was the most dramatic. He stood in chains before the court, defiant even in defeat. "You stole my throne," he accused Theron. "My father should have ruled. You have no rightful claim. Your father was a coward who fled the kingdom during the War of Succession." Theron replied coldly. "My father stayed and fought. That's why the crown is mine, and you, cousin, just proved you're as much a coward as he was." Stefan was exiled to the northern wastes, his title stripped, his fortune seized. The Moravian and Polish diplomats who'd funded the conspiracy were expelled from the kingdom. Their government sent formal protests that Theron ignored. And the traitorous guards and nobles were executed, their families stripped of rank, but not punished themselves. Mercy where it could be given, justice where it was required. Through it all, Mira attended every session. Learning court politics, learning how power moved through networks of obligation and fear, learning how to navigate a world she'd never been meant to enter. The other nobles didn't know what to make of her. Some treated her with cautious respect, recognizing that she had the king's favor. Others whispered behind fans and jeweled hands, calling her an upstart, a commoner playing at nobility. A few tried to befriend her, sensing opportunity in her sudden rise. Mira learned to navigate them all, to smile when necessary, to deflect when prudent, to listen more than she spoke, because listening had always been her greatest skill. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of trials, Theron invited her to walk with him through the palace gardens. It had become something of a routine over the past weeks. Late-night walks where they could speak freely, away from the watchful eyes of the court. "You're adapting well," Theron observed as they walked past flowering trees and marble fountains, to the politics. "I'm learning who wants something from me versus who respects me. That's the most important lesson of court life." He paused beside a fountain, watching water cascade over stone. "How are you handling the title? The lands? Is it too much? Honestly?" Mira sat on the fountain's edge. "It's terrifying. I grew up in poverty. My father traded furs for bread, and now I have an estate and servants and people who bow when I pass. It feels like wearing someone else's clothes." "You earned it," Theron said again. "It's not about earning, Your Majesty. It's about belonging. I don't belong in this world. No one belongs anywhere," Theron said quietly. "We all just pretend we do until it becomes true. Do you believe that?" "I have to." His expression was distant. "I've been king for 15 years. Before that, I was a soldier. Before that, a child who watched his father die in war. I've never felt like I belonged on this throne. But I do the work. I make the decisions, and eventually, the role becomes the reality." Mira studied his profile in the moonlight. The hard lines of his face, the silver in his dark hair, the weight of 15 years visible in the set of his shoulders. "You're lonely," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Every king is lonely, Theron replied. It comes with the crown. Does it have to? He turned to look at her. What do you mean? I mean, Mira chose her words carefully. You've spent 15 years surviving assassination attempts and political conspiracies. You've built walls so high that no one can reach you. But walls that keep threats out also keep connection in. Is that why you walk with me? Theron asked. To tell me I'm emotionally distant? I walk with you because you're the first person in this palace who sees me as human instead of a crown. And I think, she continued, that you walk with me for the same reason. Because I see you as a man instead of a king. Silence stretched between them. Then Theron said, You're dangerous, Mira Volkov. Why? Because you speak truth? Because I make you want things you've trained yourself not to need. What things? Connection. Companionship. The possibility that someone might stay not because they're obligated, but because they choose to. Mira's heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady. And do those possibilities frighten you? Yes. Theron's honesty was stark, because everyone I've trusted has either died or betrayed me. Except you. Except me, Mira agreed. So what do we do about that? We, Theron repeated, the same way he had weeks ago in her chambers. As if the word itself was significant. Yes, we. Because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. So we're stuck with each other. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. Something shifted in Theron's expression. The walls he'd built, the defenses he'd maintained for 15 years seemed to crack just slightly, enough to let a little warmth through. You really are extraordinarily stubborn. I learned from the best, Your Majesty. Stop calling me that when we're alone. Call me Theron. Mira smiled. All right. Theron. They walked in comfortable silence after that, two people learning to exist in the same space without pretense. It wasn't romance. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something that felt like it might become important. The trials concluded. The conspirators were dealt with. The kingdom slowly returned to normal. But Theron made good on his promise to Mira. She became an integral part of his council, attending meetings on trade, on diplomacy, on intelligence gathering. Her linguistic skills proved invaluable. But more than that, her perspective mattered. She'd come from poverty. She understood how common citizens thought, what they needed, what they feared. And she wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. During one particularly contentious council meeting about increasing taxes on the Eastern Territories, Mira interrupted a noble's proposal. With respect, Lord Hadrian, that tax would devastate farming communities that are already struggling. They can't afford higher levies. The treasury needs funds, Lord Hadrian countered. The Eastern Territories are prosperous enough to contribute more. Prosperous for the landowners, Mira corrected. Not for the farmers who work those lands. Increase taxes, and you'll trigger food shortages, poverty and resentment. You'll destabilize the very territories you're trying to profit from. The council turned to Theron, waiting for his judgment. What do you propose instead? He asked Mira. Tax luxury goods from foreign imports. The nobles who can afford silks and wines and exotic spices can afford to pay more. Leave the farmers alone. Lord Hadrian sputtered. Your Majesty, you can't seriously be considering a peasant's opinion over your own nobles. Theron's expression went cold. That peasant uncovered a coup that would have killed me, and most of this council. Her opinion carries more weight than yours ever will. The tax on luxury imports was implemented. The Eastern Territories remained stable. And Mira's reputation as someone who genuinely cared about the kingdom's well-being grew. 6 months after the coup attempt, the palace had settled into a new rhythm. Mira was no longer a curiosity but an established figure in court. Nobles sought her advice on foreign relations. Ambassadors requested her presence at negotiations, and Theron relied on her counsel more than anyone else's. But with prominence came danger of a different kind. Not assassination plots, but political maneuvering. There were still those who resented her rise, who saw her common birth as an insult, who whispered that she'd seduced the king to gain power, that her skills were exaggerated, that she was manipulating him for personal gain. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than perception in court politics. Lady Isidora, a noblewoman with ancient bloodlines and too much influence, began a subtle campaign against Mira. She never attacked directly. Instead, she spread doubt through careful questions. Is it appropriate for someone without noble training to advise on matters of state? Does the king's favor extend beyond professional respect? Can we trust someone whose loyalties weren't born but bought? The whispers spread. Other nobles took up the questions, not out of malice but out of genuine concern. The court became divided between those who respected Mira's contributions and those who questioned her legitimacy. Mira felt the shift like ice water down her spine. She'd survived assassination plots only to be undermined by gossip. "You need to address this," Commander Ravas told her during a private conversation. "Lady Isidora is dangerous. She doesn't use weapons. She uses words, and words can destroy just as effectively. What do you suggest? Make your position undeniable. Prove your value so thoroughly that no one can question it." How? An opportunity was about to present itself. A delegation from the Valerian Empire, the largest and most powerful nation on the continent, arrived, requesting an audience with King Theron. The Valerians spoke exclusively in their own language, a complex dialect that few outsiders understood. They brought proposals for a trade alliance that could either enrich the kingdom or entangle it in Valerian politics for generations. "We need a translator," Lyra reported to the council. "Someone fluent in Valerian who can parse the nuances of their proposals. Do we have anyone?" The council looked around. No one spoke Valerian. It was too rare, too difficult, too regional. Lady Isidora smiled sweetly. "Perhaps we should hire an independent translator from the university. Someone with credentials. Someone whose skills can be verified." It was a direct challenge to Mira, a suggestion that her abilities weren't sufficient for the task. Theron looked at Mira. "Can you translate Valerian?" "I've never studied it formally," she admitted, "but I speak 6 languages fluently. I can learn enough in 3 days to handle basic negotiations." "3 days isn't enough time," Lady Isidora protested. "This is too important to risk on someone learning as they go." "Then it's fortunate that I'm a fast learner," Mira replied evenly. Theron's decision was immediate. Mira will translate. Meeting adjourned. For 3 days, Mira didn't sleep. She commandeered every book on Valerian language and culture from the palace library. She interviewed the few servants who'd traveled to Valerian territories. She practiced pronunciation until her throat was raw, and grammar structures until her head pounded. Theron found her in the library past midnight on the second day, surrounded by open books and crumpled notes. "You should rest." "I will, after I master conditional verb conjugations." He sat down across from her. "Why are you pushing yourself this hard?" "Because Lady Isidora wants me to fail. And if I fail, it proves I don't belong here." "So you're learning an entire language in 3 days out of spite." "Spite is an excellent motivator," Mira said dryly. Then she looked up from her books. "Also because you trusted me. I don't want to prove her right by disappointing you." "You could never disappoint me," Theron said quietly. "You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. But I expect more of myself." He was quiet for a moment, studying her exhausted face. Then he said, "When this is over, when you've proven yourself yet again, take a day off. Sleep. Eat something besides whatever the servants bring you at your desk. Remember, you're human. I'll remember I'm human when people stop questioning whether I deserve to be here. That's not the same thing." "No. But it's all I have right now." The Valerian delegation arrived the next morning. 5 diplomats in elaborate robes, speaking a language that sounded like water over stones, musical and complex. Mira stood beside Theron's throne, her new formal robes marking her as royal advisor, and prayed that 3 days of frantic study would be enough. The lead Valerian diplomat spoke first, his words flowing in intricate patterns. Mira's brain scrambled to translate, pulling together vocabulary and grammar and context. Honored King Theron, we bring greetings from Emperor Cassius. He proposes a trade alliance that would benefit both our nations. Our ships would carry your goods to distant markets. Your roads would carry our merchants to new territories. Together we would prosper. She translated smoothly, her pronunciation imperfect but comprehensible. The Valerian diplomats exchanged surprised glances. Theron nodded. Tell them we're interested in hearing the specific terms. Mira translated. The negotiation continued for hours, proposals and counterproposals. Discussions of tariffs and trade routes and mutual defense agreements. The Valerian language was fiendishly complex, with subtle shifts in tone that changed meaning entirely. But Mira navigated it, catching nuances, clarifying ambiguities, ensuring both sides understood each other. At one point, two diplomats spoke quietly to each other in rapid Valerian, thinking the exchange was private. Mira heard them discussing how to manipulate the terms in their favor, how to hide certain clauses that would give Valerians unfair advantage. She calmly informed Theron of exactly what they'd said. The diplomats went pale. They realized their supposedly private conversation had been understood. Theron's expression remained neutral. Tell them that any alliance between our kingdoms will be based on transparency and mutual respect. Hidden clauses and manipulative terms are unacceptable. We negotiate in good faith, or not at all. Mira translated. The diplomats, chastened, revised their proposals. The negotiations continued on more honest terms. When the Valerian delegation finally departed, they'd agreed to a fair trade alliance with clearly defined terms. And they'd left with respect for both the king and his translator. The court reaction to Mira's successful translation was immediate and decisive. Even Lady Isadora couldn't argue with results. A trade alliance with the Valerian Empire was a diplomatic triumph, and Mira had achieved it after learning a language in 3 days. The whispers didn't stop entirely, they never would. But they changed character. No longer questioning her competence, they questioned her humanity. How does she learn languages so quickly? Is it magic? Does she have some advantage we don't know about? Mira found the new rumors almost amusing. She had no magic. Just desperation, stubbornness, and the memory of a father who'd taught her that languages were keys to worlds she'd never otherwise access. But she let people wonder. Mystery had its own kind of power. That evening, Theron invited her to dinner in his private chambers. Not a council meeting. Not a political strategy session. Just dinner. Mira had been in these chambers a dozen times before, but always for official purposes. This felt different. More intimate. You've proven yourself again, Theron said as they ate. The Valerian alliance will bring prosperity to the kingdom. Thank you. I just did my job. Your job as royal advisor. Learning a language in 3 days is beyond anyone's job description. Mira shrugged. I'm motivated by spite and validation. Powerful combination. He poured wine for both of them. But I notice you never take time for yourself. You work constantly. You study constantly. When do you rest? When there's nothing left to prove. That day will never come, Theron observed. There will always be someone who questions you. Someone who resents your success. Someone who wants you to fail. Then I'll never rest. That's not sustainable. Neither is being a king who survives 17 assassination attempts. We all make choices about what we can sustain. Theron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I worry about you. Why? You're the most capable person in this palace. Because capability isn't the same as contentment. You've achieved everything you set out to do. You have status, wealth, respect. But are you happy? The question caught Mira off guard. She set down her wine glass, considering. I don't know, she admitted. I spent so long just trying to survive that I never thought about happiness. And now I spend so much time proving I deserve this that I don't have energy left for anything else. That's what I thought, Theron said gently. Which brings me to a proposition. Mira raised an eyebrow. What kind of proposition? The kind that has nothing to do with politics or linguistics or court intrigue. The kind that's purely personal. He stood, crossed to a cabinet, and retrieved something wrapped in silk. Then he returned to the table and placed it in front of her. Open it. Mira unwrapped the silk carefully. Inside was a book. But not just any book. It was a first edition collection of poetry from her homeland, written in her native language, printed before the wars had destroyed most of the northern territories. She hadn't seen a copy in years. "How did you find this?" she whispered. "I have spies across the continent," Theron said. "I put them to work finding something that mattered to you. Not as royal advisor, not as translator, but as Mira. Person. Human. Someone who deserves beautiful things just for existing." Tears pricked her eyes. She touched the book's cover reverently. "Why? Because you give everything to this kingdom. To me. And I wanted to give something back that wasn't a title or a responsibility. Just a gift. Theron, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." He sat down again, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "Just accept that you're valued. Not for what you do, but for who you are." Mira clutched the book to her chest. For 15 years she'd been valued only for utility, for what she could provide. Her father had valued her language skills. The palace had valued her translations. Even Theron had initially valued her for uncovering the conspiracy. But this gift, this poetry collection, was different. It said, "You matter beyond your usefulness." "Thank you," she whispered. "Truly." They finished dinner in comfortable silence. Then Theron said, "I need to tell you something. It's about Lady Isidora's campaign against you. I know she's been spreading rumors, I'm aware. It doesn't bother me. It should. Because she's not working alone." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've uncovered evidence that she's connected to remaining conspirators from Stefan's coup. Nothing concrete enough to arrest her, but enough to know she's dangerous." "You think she'll try to hurt me?" "I think she'll try to use you to hurt me. You're my closest advisor. If she can discredit you, she weakens my position. And if she can eliminate you, she creates chaos." Mira absorbed this. "So what do? We stay vigilant. We watch her carefully. And we prepare for the possibility that she'll escalate." "There's something else," Theron continued, "something I've been considering for weeks. I want to offer you a position that would make you untouchable." What position could possibly be higher than royal advisor? Queen. The word hung in the air like a struck bell. Mira stared at him. "You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything." Theron held her gaze. "Marry me. Not for politics, though it would certainly have political benefits. Not for alliance, though it would silence your critics. But because, over the past 6 months, you've become the person I trust most. The person I want at my side. The person who makes this lonely throne feel less cold. Theron, I'm a commoner, a former kitchen maid. No one will accept this. They'll accept it because I'm king and my word is law." He reached across the table, took her hand. "But more importantly, do you accept it?" "I don't know." Mira's voice shook. "This is enormous. This changes everything." "Yes." "But isn't that what we've been doing all along? Changing everything?" She looked down at their joined hands. His scarred and strong from decades of battle. Hers small but calloused from years of hard work. Two people from completely different worlds who'd somehow found common ground. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need. But know this." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "I'm not asking because you're useful. I'm asking because you're you." And that's enough. Mira didn't sleep that night. She lay in her chambers, staring at the silk canopy above her bed, turning Theron's proposal over in her mind like a jewel examined from every angle. Marriage, to the king. Queen of the realm. It was impossible. It was terrifying. It was everything she'd never dared to imagine. But beyond the titles and politics, there was something simpler. Theron had said he wanted her, not for what she could do, but for who she was. And somewhere in the past 6 months, without noticing exactly when it happened, she'd come to care for him too. Not the king. The man. The one who walked with her in gardens and spoke about loneliness. The one who'd survived 17 assassination attempts and still chose to trust her. The one who gave her poetry because beautiful things mattered. By morning, she'd made her decision. She found Theron in his study, reviewing reports. He looked up when she entered, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes? Yes. I'll marry you." Theron stood, crossed the room in 3 strides, and pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "You're certain?" "Absolutely not," Mira admitted against his chest. "I'm terrified. But I'm certain that whatever comes next, I want to face it with you." That's all I needed to hear. The announcement was made that afternoon. King Theron would marry Mira Volkov, his royal advisor and chief of linguistic intelligence. The court erupted. Some nobles were genuinely pleased, recognizing that Mira had earned her position. Others were outraged, seeing it as an insult to noble bloodlines. And a few, like Lady Isadora, were calculating, seeing opportunity in chaos. The wedding was planned for 3 weeks later. A royal wedding required preparation, ceremony, witnesses from allied kingdoms. But more than that, it required Mira to learn how to be a queen. She was tutored in court etiquette, in ceremonial protocols, in the 1,000 small rules that governed royal behavior. She learned which fork to use at state dinners, how to curtsy to visiting dignitaries, which robes to wear for which occasions. It was exhausting and sometimes absurd. But she persevered, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what she represented. A common girl becoming queen sent a message to every citizen in the kingdom, that worth wasn't determined by birth, that competence mattered more than bloodlines, that change was possible. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lady Isadora made her move. She requested a private audience with King Theron, claiming urgent information about border security. Theron, suspecting a trap but curious about her intentions, agreed. Mira insisted on attending. The meeting took place in a neutral chamber, with guards stationed outside. Lady Isadora entered dressed in elegant black, her expression appropriately grave. "Your Majesty," she began, "I come with a heavy heart. Information has reached me about your intended bride." "What information?" Theron's voice was cold. Evidence that she's not who she claims to be. Lady Isadora produced documents, letters allegedly written in Mira's hand to foreign contacts. They suggest she's been passing intelligence to Moravian agents. That her exposure of the conspiracy was a ploy to gain your trust. That she's the real threat to the kingdom. The accusations hung in the air like poison. Mira felt ice flood her veins. The documents were forgeries. They had to be. She'd never betrayed the kingdom. Never, but they looked authentic. Official seals, correct dates, her signature perfectly replicated. "These are lies," Mira said quietly. "I've never communicated with Moravian agents. I've never betrayed King Theron or this kingdom." "Can you prove that?" Lady Isadora asked sweetly. "Can you demonstrate that these documents are false? Because they appear quite legitimate. And if they're real, Your Majesty, you're about to marry a traitor." Theron stood, his expression carved from stone. "Get out." "Your Majesty, you should at least investigate." "I said get out." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "Now, before I have you arrested for slander." Lady Isadora's composure cracked slightly. "You would threaten me? A loyal noble with impeccable bloodlines over a commoner who's clearly deceived you?" That commoner saved my life. That commoner uncovered a conspiracy that would have destroyed this kingdom. And you, Lady Isadora, have just proven that you're either a fool or a liar. Possibly both, he gestured to the guards. Escort Lady Isadora from the palace. She's banned from court until further notice. As the noblewoman was removed, still protesting, Theron turned to Mira. I want those documents analyzed. Every seal, every signature, every word. We'll prove they're forgeries. And then we'll find out who's behind this. You believe me, Mira said. It wasn't quite a question. But almost, without hesitation, Theron replied. I've trusted you with my life, with my kingdom, with my future. A few pieces of parchment won't change that. The documents were indeed forgeries. Lyra's investigation revealed that they'd been created by a skilled forger hired by Lady Isadora, using samples of Mira's handwriting stolen from council records. More than that, the investigation uncovered Lady Isadora's connections to the remaining conspirators. She'd been funding a second coup attempt, planning to strike during the royal wedding when security would be focused on ceremony rather than threat. She was arrested, tried, and exiled. Her co-conspirators were rooted out and dealt with. And the wedding proceeded as planned. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that felt like a blessing. The palace was transformed, decorated with flowers from every corner of the kingdom, white roses and blue irises, golden marigolds and purple orchids, filling the air with fragrance and color. Mira stood in her chambers, wearing a gown that had taken 12 seamstresses 3 weeks to create. It was beautiful, all silk and lace and pearls, but she barely noticed it. Because today she would become queen. Today everything would change. Are you ready? Commander Ravas stood at her door, unexpectedly sentimental. He'd volunteered to escort her to the ceremony, a gesture that had made Mira tear up when he'd offered. As ready as I'll ever be. You've earned this, he said. Not just the crown, but the happiness. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Thank you for everything. For believing in me when no one else did. I believed in your competence. The fact that you're also a good person was a pleasant surprise. She laughed, and together they walked to the great hall. The ceremony was witnessed by nobles and common citizens alike. Theron had insisted that the palace gates be opened, that anyone who wished to attend could do so. It was unprecedented, but then, everything about this wedding was unprecedented. Mira walked down the aisle between rows of people whose lives she'd touched. Servants who'd worked alongside her in the kitchens. Soldiers who'd protected her during investigations. Council members who'd come to respect her judgment. And at the end of the aisle, Theron waited. He wore ceremonial robes of deep crimson, his crown catching the light from a dozen chandeliers. But his eyes were only for her. The ceremony followed ancient traditions, vows spoken in formal language, rings exchanged, blessings given by priests who represented every faith in the kingdom. But when it came time for Theron to speak his personal vows, he abandoned the script. Mira Volkov, he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. 6 months ago, you were invisible to everyone in this kingdom except me. You saw a conspiracy when everyone else saw loyalty. You spoke truth when everyone else remained silent. You chose courage when safety would have been easier. Today, I'm not just making you my queen. I'm asking you to continue being exactly who you've always been. Someone who sees what others miss. Someone who speaks for those without voices. Someone who chooses honor over comfort. Be my queen. But more than that, be my partner. Mira's voice was steady when she replied, Theron, you taught me that strength comes in many forms. That walls built to keep out threats also keep out connection. That loneliness isn't required by crowns. I promise to stand with you. To speak truth even when it's difficult. To see you not as a king but as a man who deserves companionship and trust and love. Be my king. But more than that, be my friend." The hall erupted in cheers. Not polite ceremony. Genuine joy. Because this wedding represented something larger than two people joining their lives. It represented hope. Change, the possibility that worth could be earned rather than inherited. The celebration lasted through the night. Musicians played. Dancers performed. Food and wine flowed freely. And for the first time in 15 years, King Theron laughed. Not the cold smile he showed at court functions. Real laughter. Warm and unguarded. Months later, Queen Mira implemented her first major policy change. She established a royal language academy, free to anyone who wished to learn. Common citizens could study foreign languages, diplomatic protocols, translation skills. The same skills that had saved her life would now be available to others. Orphans and farm girls and merchants' children. Anyone with aptitude and determination. Because communication was power, and power should never be hoarded by the privileged few. The academy flourished. Students from across the kingdom arrived to study. Some became translators. Others became diplomats. A few became spies, but all of them learned that their voices mattered, that being overlooked didn't mean being worthless. And in the palace, Queen Mira continued the work she'd always done. Translating, advising, listening, seeing what others missed and speaking truth to power. But now she did it from the throne beside Theron. Equal partners. Equal voices. Two people who'd both been invisible in different ways, now seen and respected. They changed the kingdom together. Laws that favored the poor. Policies that protected the vulnerable. Alliances built on mutual respect rather than domination. It wasn't perfect. There were still conspiracies to uncover, conflicts to resolve, nobles who resented a common-born queen. But Mira had learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Progress was. One day, years later, a young girl approached Queen Mira at a public audience. The girl was dressed in servant's clothes, her hands rough from work, her eyes bright with intelligence. "Your Majesty," she said nervously, "I want to apply to the language academy. But I'm just a kitchen maid. I don't know if I'm allowed." Mira knelt down so they were eye level. "What's your name?" "Elara, Your Majesty." "Well, Elara, I was a kitchen maid too. And if I can become queen, you can become whatever you choose. The academy exists for people exactly like you." The girl's face transformed with hope. Then she asked, "Is it true that you learned Valerian in 3 days?" "It's true." "How?" "The same way you'll learn whatever language calls to you. Desperation, stubbornness, and the belief that you deserve to be heard." Mira stood, placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Never let anyone tell you that being invisible means being worthless. You matter. Your voice matters. Your potential is limitless." The girl left with an application to the academy and a future full of possibility, and Queen Mira returned to her throne beside Theron, where she continued the work of building a kingdom where everyone, regardless of birth or status, had the chance to be seen, because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. That power wasn't about crowns or titles or bloodlines. It was about choosing courage when silence would be safer. It was about using your voice to speak for those who couldn't. It was about building bridges instead of walls. And it was about never ever forgetting where you came from. She was Mira Volkov, former kitchen maid, royal translator, queen, but more than any title, she was someone who'd chosen to be seen. And in doing so, she'd changed everything.